So, finitude then is a way of defining what it is to be a human being. So defining, as it were, the human condition. So Jean-Paul Sartre, for example, in 1945, writes that to be human is to be exposed to three forms of necessity. I'm obliged to be born and to die and to exist amongst what he calls a multitude of other beings. And I have no choice about any of those three things. They're kind of non-negotiable, as it were, for the time being. Things may change, but for the time being, those are non-negotiable. And that state, then, we can call a state of being finite, inasmuch as my existence is limited by, or circumscribed by, those three necessities. So that would be human existence as, by definition, finite. And, as it were, the strong description of that situation is one that Sartre is responding to and developing in that little moment there in 1945, which is Heidegger's proposition, description of what I'm going to call human existence, although that's slightly controversial in relation to Heidegger, but we don't need to worry about that for now. So human existence as what he calls being towards death. So at that point, death then, so a limit, defines what it is to be a human being. And finitude as a term in these discussions comes into these discussions as the translation of Heidegger's term Endlichkeit, which means, as it were, being towards or being in relation to, or the state of being defined by being in relation to an end, would be a way of translating that, I suppose. So, one initial way we can think about finitude then is as this, as a definition of what it is to be a human being. It's a definition in terms of limits. So the politics of finitude would be, as it were, anything that we might think or want to do or say politically in the light of that as an existential situation. Okay, so given that this is the truth of our existential condition, is there anything that follows politically from that? I'm not sure there is, but is there anything that, what kind of arguments and debates might we have politically in the light of that fact? And my proposal then, what I call the proposal of finitude, is the proposal that that existential state of affairs, inasmuch as by definition it defines the existence of each and every human being, proposes a kind of equality at the level of our being. So inasmuch as we are all human, and therefore by definition all finite, we are therefore equal already. Now, the political question then is there anything that we can meaningfully say or do politically in response to that as a situation? Or might we take that way of describing our situation as implying a politics? And again, my argument is that yes, we might and we should. That existential situation, that describing our existential situation in that way demands an egalitarian politics, which is what then I would call the politics of finitude. So Antelme was a member of the French resistance in occupied Paris in the Second World War, arrested and deported by the Nazis, held for just over a year in some different camps, mostly in a labour camp at a place called Gandersheim. And he survived, and when he returned from that experience and returned to health, he wrote a memoir of his experiences called L'Espèce humaine, or the human race. And the point of that memoir is to, as its title suggests, is to try and understand the meaning of these experiences, or what the significance of this experience might be, at the level of an understanding of what it is to be a human being. And because, rightly, he understands the abuse that he's just been subjected to as situated at that level, that it is, this is a system established in order to effect dehumanization, which is to say, to split humanity into the fully human and the subhuman. So Antelme's understanding is then that in order to respond to that attempt, one thing that is necessary, one thing we need to develop, is an understanding of what it is to be a human being that can render any such attempt illegitimate, and so can give us a resource for opposing any kind of attempt along those lines, any kind of attempt at dehumanization. And he does this by demonstrating the failure of this attempted dehumanization. But he does this in a rather surprising way, in a way which actually gives us more resources than other similar attempts. There is a temptation, of course, to argue that the attempt to dehumanize some individuals will fail because of something like the unbreakable resistance of the human spirit, or whatever it might be, some sort of positive quality or capacity. Now, what Antelme understands is that defining humanity in that way on the basis of any kind of positive capacity is always going to permit some moment of discrimination, some line to be drawn between those who possess this quality and those who don't. And that, plainly, isn't going to work then as a resource with which to oppose the logic of dehumanization, because it lends itself to exactly that structure. So what he understands then is we have to find another way of defining this. And his argument is that simply, the attempt by the oppressor to, as he puts it, to have his victim change species will fail. That when the victim dies, say, in the most extreme case, the victim will die as a human being. And it's that fact, then, that says to Antelme, okay, it's on that basis that we can declare what he calls the indivisibility of the human race. Now that, then, again, proposes a kind of unbreakable equality at the level of existence, but that doesn't depend on the possession of any positive quality or capacity. And it's that makes it, as it were, truly universal. Antelme then draws political conclusions from that way of defining the unity or the indivisibility of the human race, and those conclusions are egalitarian. As he puts it, the division of humanity into hierarchies, and he cites specifically class and race hierarchies, by which he means colonialism. That attempt is by definition then abusive and needs to be opposed.